The river was alive that evening. Its waters sparkled under the setting sun, casting golden ripples that danced like restless spirits. Chidinma's bare feet brushed against the cool grass, her worn wrapper swaying gently with each step. She had always loved this place, the quiet murmur of the river, the cool breeze that smelled of wet earth, and the way the light seemed to bend and shimmer like magic. Her mother's voice echoed in her mind, "Stay away from the river when the sun sets, Chidinma. That's when the spirits roam." But Chidinma had never been one to listen. She glanced back at the village, now a distant cluster of mud huts with thatched roofs. Smoke from cooking fires curled lazily into the sky, carrying the scent of roasted yams and plantains. She sighed. This was her escape, the one place where she didn't have to worry about chores, gossiping aunties, or the expectations that weighed heavily on her shoulders. Chidinma. The sharp voice of Ada broke her reverie. Turning, she saw her friend approaching, balancing a large clay pot of water on her head with practiced ease. "Your mother is looking for you again. She says you're too restless, always wandering off." Chidinma shrugged, a playful smile tugging at her lips. "Let her look. The river calls me, Ada. I can't explain it, but I feel like it's alive." Ada gave her a skeptical look. "You and your stories. One day you'll wander too far, and you'll wish you had listened. They say the river god watches from the depths, waiting for a foolish girl to take. Then I'll make sure I don't look too foolish," Chidinma teased. "Besides, don't you ever wonder if the stories are true? What if the river god really exists?" Ada shook her head firmly. "The stories are warnings, not adventures. Come back with me before the elders see you here." But Chidinma wasn't listening. Something had caught her eye near the edge of the water. It was a glint of light, faint and fleeting, like the wink of a firefly. "I'll catch up," she said absently, waving Ada off. "Chidinma." Ada started, but she knew better than to argue. With a resigned sigh, she turned and headed back toward the village. Chidinma moved closer to the riverbank, her heartbeat quickening. Kneeling by the water's edge, she pushed aside the reeds and spotted a small stone, half buried in the sand. It was smooth and round, about the size of her palm, and etched with swirling patterns that seemed to shimmer in the fading light. "What is this?" she murmured, brushing her fingers over its surface. A strange warmth radiated from the stone, sending a shiver down her spine. She hesitated. The stone felt alive, pulsing faintly, almost like a heartbeat. Something deep within her whispered, "Pick it up." Before she could second-guess herself, her fingers closed around the stone. The moment she lifted it, the world seemed to shift. The ground trembled beneath her knees, and a low hum filled the air, growing louder with each passing second. Panic surged through her. "What's happening?" she gasped, dropping the stone. But it was too late. The stone's glow intensified, blinding her with its brilliance. A gust of wind whipped through the riverbank, carrying leaves and dust into a swirling vortex. The water roared, rising as if reaching for her. Chidinma tried to move to scream, but her body felt rooted to the spot. The hum grew deafening, and then with a final flash of light, the world around her vanished. Chidinma opened her eyes slowly. Her body felt weightless, as though she were floating in a dream. There, or was it water, was cool against her skin, and her surroundings shimmered with an otherworldly glow. She blinked, trying to make sense of what she was seeing. Above her, the sky was a canopy of rippling light, casting ever-shifting patterns on the world below. Coral towers rose like ancient trees, their surfaces alive with bioluminescent creatures. Schools of fish with shimmering scales swam past, their movements synchronized like a well-rehearsed dance. The ground beneath her feet was soft, covered in a thick carpet of colorful seaweed. "Where am I?" Chidinma whispered, her voice trembling. "You are in my domain," a deep, resonant voice answered. She spun around, clutching the glowing stone tightly. Standing before her was a figure unlike anything she had ever imagined. He was tall, his form both regal and fearsome. His skin shimmered like the surface of the river under the sun, shifting between shades of silver and blue. His eyes were a piercing gold, and his hair flowed like liquid silver, cascading down his back. Chidinma's breath caught in her throat. Who are you?" "I am Ease and Dew," the figure said, his voice echoing like the rumble of distant thunder. The one you call the river god. She staggered back, her heart pounding. The stories had always described him as a powerful, vengeful spirit. What had she done? I didn't mean to come here, she stammered, clutching the stone tighter. I didn't know. Isendu raised a hand, silencing her. Few were chosen to find the stone, Chidinma. It is not by chance that you are here. How do you know my name? She whispered. I know all who live by my waters, he replied. I have watched you since you were a child, wandering the riverbank, listening to its whispers. Chidinma's knees felt weak. Please, I didn't mean to disturb you. Let me go back. My mother, my village, they'll be looking for me. Isendu stepped closer, his gaze unyielding. The portal you opened has been sealed for centuries. It connects your world to mine, a bond that was severed long ago. By opening it, you have awakened forces beyond your understanding. I didn't mean to. Chidinma cried, tears streaming down her face. I don't want any of this. The river god's expression softened, though his eyes still held an ancient sadness. Do not fear, child. You are under my protection now. But the path you have set in motion cannot be undone. Chidinma shook her head, her mind racing. What does that mean? What's going to happen to me? Isendu regarded her for a long moment before speaking. You will stay here in my world. You are no longer a mere mortal. The portal has marked you. No, she cried, backing away. I want to go home. Isendu's gaze darkened, his voice low and firm. Your home is here now. Before she could protest further, a wave of exhaustion washed over her. Her vision blurred, and the last thing she saw was the river god's towering figure before the darkness claimed her. Chidinma's dreams were filled with rushing water and fleeting images, a river that seemed to stretch into infinity, the glow of the stone she had held, and golden eyes that burned like twin suns. When she finally opened her eyes, she found herself lying on a soft, moss-like surface that gave off a faint, comforting warmth. The air around her was alive with a gentle hum, like a song sung by unseen voices. The light was dim and blue, casting shadows that danced across the walls of what appeared to be an underwater palace. The room was round, its walls made of smooth coral that glowed faintly, and the ceiling arched high above her, resembling the surface of a tranquil sea. She sat up slowly, her body feeling lighter than it ever had before. The events of the riverbank came rushing back, and panic gripped her chest. I'm still here, she whispered, her voice breaking. You are awake. The voice startled her, and she turned sharply to see Isendu standing at the far end of the room. His presence filled the space, his silver hair flowing like currents in the water, his golden eyes locked onto hers. He seemed less imposing now, though no less otherworldly. I want to go home, Chidinma said, her voice trembling. She tried to rise, but her legs buckled beneath her, and she fell back onto the soft surface. You are not yet strong enough, Isendu said, stepping closer. This world is not kind to mortals. It will take time for your body to adjust. I didn't ask to come here, she said, her anger rising despite her fear. I didn't ask for any of this. The river god knelt before her, his golden eyes studying her intently. And yet, here you are. The stone chose you, Chidinma. Whether you sought it or not, your fate is now tied to this realm. I don't believe in fate, she spat. Send me back, please. My mother, my family, they'll think I've drowned. Isendu's expression shifted, a shadow passing over his face. Your mother will mourn you. Your village will weep. But they will move on, as mortals always do. Chidinma's breath hitched, tears welling in her eyes. You're cruel, she whispered. You took me from everything I know. I am many things, Isendu said quietly, but I am not cruel. In time, you will understand. Understand what? She cried. That you've stolen my life? That I'm trapped here with a river god I've only heard about in stories? Isendu stood, his towering figure casting a long shadow over her. You are not a prisoner, Chidinma. You are a part of something much larger than yourself. Rest now. You will have your answers soon enough. Before she could argue further, he turned and strode out of the room. The door, if it could be called that, sealed itself behind him with a shimmering wave of light, leaving her alone in the dimly glowing chamber. The silence was deafening. Chidinma curled up on the mossy surface, hugging her knees to her chest. Her thoughts swirled like a storm, questions without answers. Who was Izndu really? Why had the stone chosen her? And what was this place? As her tears dried, she noticed something strange, a faint melody, soft and haunting, drifting through the room. It seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. The sound wrapped around her like a warm embrace, easing her fear and sadness. She sat up, her ears straining to follow the music. "Who's there?" she called out, her voice quivering. The melody stopped abruptly, replaced by a soft chuckle. "You hear us?" Chidinma froze. "Who said that?" "We did," the voice replied, echoing faintly. It was neither male nor female, yet it carried a warmth that made her shiver. "Where are you?" she demanded, glancing around the room. "In the water." "And there." "Everywhere," the voice said. "We are the spirit of this place, little one. You are not alone." Chidinma frowned, her fear giving way to confusion. "What do you want from me?" "We want nothing," the voice replied. "But you are special. Chosen. The stone saw the light in you." "What light?" she asked, her frustration mounting. "I don't feel special. I feel lost." "Lost, yes, but not forever. You will see. You will understand." Before she could ask more, the melody began again, growing fainter until it disappeared entirely. Chidinma was left alone with her thoughts, the room once again silent except for the faint hum of the coral walls. Hours, or perhaps days, passed before Izndu returned. Chidinma had no sense of time in this strange world, but the sight of him filled her with a mix of relief and anger. "You left me alone," she said as he entered the room, his imposing figure casting long shadows. "I've been hearing things. Voices." Izndu raised an eyebrow. "The spirits of this realm. They are harmless. They said I'm chosen, that the stone saw something in me." "What does that mean?" she demanded. Izndu hesitated, his golden eyes narrowing. "The stone is a fragment of ancient power. It was not meant to be found. Not yet. You were not ready." "Then why did it choose me?" she pressed. "That," Izndu said, his voice heavy, "is a question I have yet to answer myself." His cryptic response only frustrated her further. "I don't belong here," she said. "I belong in Ukabia with my family. My people." "Your people cannot help you now," Izndu said sharply. "The portal has marked you, Chidinma. Returning to your village would bring danger to all who live there." "What kind of danger?" she asked, her voice trembling. "There are forces beyond your understanding," he said. "The portal connects our worlds, but it also holds back things that should never be unleashed. By opening it, you have set those forces in motion." Chidinma's heart pounded. "So you're saying this is my fault?" "I'm saying," Izndu said, his voice softening, "that you are part of a greater destiny. One that will require strength and courage. But you are not alone. I will protect you." Chidinma looked away, tears threatening to spill. "I didn't ask for this," she whispered. "No one ever does," he replied. "But the path is before you now, and you must walk it." Chidinma lay awake on the moss-like bed long after Izndu had left. His words haunted her, forces beyond your understanding. She clutched the glowing stone tightly, its faint warmth the only comfort in this alien world. "I can't stay here," she whispered to herself. "There has to be a way back." Her thoughts churned like a storm. If the portal had been closed for centuries, why had the stone chosen her? What danger did it unleash? She needed answers, but Izndu seemed more interested in cryptic warnings than explanations. Determined, she rose to her feet. Her legs trembled at first, but the buoyant air, or water, made moving easier than she expected. The chamber was quiet, save for the faint hum of the coral walls. A shimmering doorway stood where Izndu had exited. She approached cautiously, pressing her hand against the surface. To her surprise, the barrier dissolved like mist, revealing a long, spiraling corridor lit by glowing veins of blue energy that pulsed along the walls. "Where does this lead?" she murmured, stepping forward. The corridor twisted and turned, each step filling her with equal parts dread and curiosity. The air felt heavier the deeper she went, as if the walls themselves were holding their breath. Finally, she came to a vast chamber. It was unlike anything she had seen before. The room was circular, with a towering column of swirling water in the center. Inside the column floated shimmering orbs, each one pulsating with a strange, ethereal light. "What is this place?" Chidinma whispered, stepping closer. Her footsteps echoed in the chamber, but she wasn't alone. "Do not touch them." The voice made her jump. She turned to see Izndu standing at the entrance, his golden eyes blazing with an intensity that froze her in place. "I told you to rest," he said, his tone sharp. "I couldn't just sit there," she shot back. "You've taken me from my home, filled my head with riddles, and expect me to wait patiently? I deserve to know what's going on." Izndu sighed, his expression softening. "You are bold, Chidinma, but there are things in this realm you are not ready to face." "Then explain it to me," she pleaded. "What are these?" She gestured toward the glowing orbs in the column. Izndu hesitated, as if weighing how much to reveal. Finally, he said, "They are memories." "Memories? Fragments of time," he explained, stepping closer. "This column is a vault. It holds the memories of those who have entered this realm before you. Warriors, healers, dreamers, and destroyers." "Destroyers," she echoed, her voice barely a whisper. Izndu's gaze darkened. "Not all who cross the portal do so with good intentions. This realm is ancient, older than your village, older than the rivers themselves. It holds power that many have sought to control. The portal was sealed to protect both our worlds. And now I've opened it," Chidinma said, guilt washing over her. "Yes," he said, "and the consequences of that act have only begun to unfold." Days passed, or at least what Chidinma thought were days. Time in Izndu's realm flowed differently. Moments stretched endlessly, while others passed in the blink of an eye. She was given a chamber of her own, with walls that shimmered like the night sky and a bed of soft, glowing moss that adjusted to her shape. Yet, despite the beauty, she felt trapped. Her dreams were no longer her own. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw flashes of faces she didn't recognize. Men and women clad in armor, their eyes fierce with determination. She saw rivers running red and a warrior standing atop a hill, his spear raised high against a monstrous tide. One night, she awoke with a start, her heart pounding. The stone in her hand was glowing brighter than ever, its pulse rapid and insistent. "What do you want from me?" she whispered, holding it up. To her shock, the stone's light flared, and a voice, not Izndu's but faint and distant, spoke in her mind, "Protect the child." Chidinma gasped, dropping the stone as if it had burned her. "What child?" The voice didn't answer, but the words lingered. She couldn't shake the feeling that they were tied to her fate and to the river god's warnings. Izndu visited her more frequently now, though their conversations were often strained. She could sense his reluctance to share too much, as if he feared what she might do with the knowledge. "Why do you keep things from me?" she demanded one evening. "It is not my intention to keep you in the dark," he said, his tone measured. "But there are truths that carry burdens too heavy for the unprepared." Chidinma bristled. "Stop treating me like a child. I've already been dragged into this, whatever this is. Don't I deserve the truth?" Izndu regarded her for a long moment. Finally, he said, "Very well. But the truth is not always what you hope to hear." He motioned for her to follow him, leading her out of her chamber and through the winding corridors of his palace. The walls glowed faintly as they passed, the light growing dimmer the deeper they went. Finally, they emerged into a vast cavern, its ceiling so high it disappeared into darkness. In the center of the cavern stood an altar carved from black stone, its surface covered in strange symbols that seemed to writhe and shift when she looked at them. "This," Izndu said, his voice echoing in the cavern, "is the heart of my realm, the source of its power and its curse." Chidinma stepped closer, her eyes drawn to the altar. "What does it do?" "It is a prison," Izndu said, his tone heavy. "Long ago, a great warrior from your world trapped me here, binding my power to this altar. He believed he was protecting his people. But in doing so, he created a divide between our worlds that could not be mended. And now I've opened it," Chidinma said, the weight of her actions sinking in. "Yes," Izndu said, his gaze piercing. "And the child you carry will decide whether that divide remains, or is destroyed. Chidinma froze, her blood turning to ice. The child. Isendu nodded solemnly. You are with child, Chidinma. My child. And his fate is tied to the portal's very existence. Chidinma staggered backward, her hand instinctively covering her stomach. She stared at Isendu, her mind a whirlwind of confusion and disbelief. No, she whispered, shaking her head. That's not possible. I've been here, what? A few days? How can I? Time flows differently in this realm, Isendu said gently, though his tone carried an undeniable weight. What feels like days to you may be weeks or months in the mortal world. Her breaths came in short gasps. You did this to me? Her voice cracked, a mix of anger and fear. You've taken everything, my home, my life, and now this? How could you? I did not choose this path for you, Isendu interrupted, his golden eyes soft but unwavering. Nor did you. The child you carry is no ordinary being. He was destined to exist, tied to the portal's power. His very essence bridges our worlds. Chidinma sank to her knees, tears streaming down her face. I didn't ask for any of this. I didn't want. Her voice broke, and she buried her face in her hands. I just want to go home. Isendu knelt before her, his towering presence suddenly feeling smaller. I understand your pain, Chidinma. More than you know. This burden is heavy, but you are not alone. She looked up at him, her eyes blazing with fury. You don't understand anything about me. You're a god. What do you know about being helpless? About having your life ripped away? For the first time, Isendu looked away, his expression shadowed. I was not always what you see before you. There was a time when I, too, was bound by forces beyond my control. Chidinma blinked, her anger faltering. What do you mean? That is a story for another time, he said, rising to his feet. For now, you must rest. The child's presence will begin to change you, and you will need your strength. Chidinma wanted to argue, to scream, but the exhaustion weighing on her was too great. She let Isendu help her to her feet and lead her back to her chamber. As she lay down, her thoughts churned relentlessly. She placed a trembling hand on her stomach, trying to feel something, anything, but there was only silence. That night, Chidinma's dreams were vivid and haunting. She stood in a field of endless water, the sky above her swirling with storm clouds. In the distance, a figure emerged, walking slowly toward her. It was a man tall and broad-shouldered, with piercing eyes and a face that radiated strength. He wore armor that glinted like the sun, and in his hand, he carried a spear that seemed to hum with energy. Who are you? Chidinma called out, her voice echoing across the water. The man stopped a few paces away, his expression unreadable. You are the vessel, he said, his voice deep and resonant. The one who carries my legacy. Your legacy, she repeated, confusion etched across her face. The child you bear, the man said, his gaze softening. He is me, reborn. Chidinma stumbled backward, shaking her head. No, this doesn't make any sense. Who are you? I was once called Obioma, the man said, a warrior of Ukabia. Long ago, I fought to seal the river god in his domain, to protect our people from his wrath. You're the one who trapped Isendu? Chidinma asked, her voice trembling. Yes, Obioma said, his tone laced with both pride and sorrow. And now through you I return. The portal's opening has set things in motion that cannot be undone. What do you want from me? She asked, fear creeping into her voice. You must protect the child, Obioma said, stepping closer. He is the key to undoing the mistakes of the past. But beware, the river god will not willingly relinquish his hold. His survival depends on keeping the portal sealed. Chidinma's breath caught in her throat. He would hurt his own child. Obioma's gaze hardened. If it means preserving his power, yes. You must be strong, Chidinma. For the child, and for the fate of both our worlds. Before she could respond, the dream began to fade, the warrior's figure dissolving into mist. She reached out, desperate for answers, but woke to find herself alone in her chamber. Chidinma sat up in bed, her heart racing. The stone was glowing brightly in her hand, its pulse matching the frantic beat of her own heart. Her mind swirled with Obioma's words. Could it be true? Was she carrying the reincarnation of a warrior who had once defied a god? As she swung her legs over the edge of the bed, she felt a strange sensation, a warmth radiating from her abdomen. Her hand flew to her stomach, and she gasped. The warmth was spreading, filling her body with an energy that was both exhilarating and terrifying. She stood, unsteady at first, and made her way to the reflective surface of the coral walls. In the faint glow of the room, she could see her reflection. Her eyes widened as she noticed faint golden patterns shimmering across her skin, like veins of light running beneath the surface. "What's happening to me?" she whispered. Before she could dwell further, the door to her chamber opened, and Izdu entered. His golden eyes immediately locked onto her glowing form, and his expression darkened. "It has begun," he said grimly. "What has begun?" she demanded, panic rising in her voice. "What's happening to me?" "The child's power is awakening," Izdu said, "and with it so is yours. You are no longer merely human, Chidinma. You are transforming into something more." "I didn't ask for this," she cried, her voice breaking. "I don't want to be part of this." "Neither did I," Izdu said softly, his tone uncharacteristically gentle. "But fate does not ask for permission. It simply is." Chidinma sank to the floor, her head in her hands. "I just want my life back," she whispered. Izdu knelt beside her, his gaze steady. "Your old life is gone, Chidinma. But the life you carry inside you is a new beginning. One that has the power to shape the future of both our worlds." Chidinma looked up at him, her eyes filled with tears. "And if I don't want that responsibility?" Izdu's expression hardened. "Then others will take it from you, by force, if necessary. There are those who would do anything to control the power of the portal. You must decide whether you will stand and fight, or be swept away by the tides." The days following her awakening were a blur. Chidinma could feel the energy coursing through her like a river's relentless current. It was as though every moment she spent in Izdu's realm pulled her deeper into its grasp, transforming her in ways she could not fully comprehend. The glowing patterns beneath her skin pulsed with each beat of her heart, a constant reminder of the power growing within her, and of the responsibility that came with it. She spent much of her time alone, pacing her chamber, trying to make sense of the turmoil inside her. The stone, which had once been a source of mystery and awe, now seemed almost like a part of her, as if it was linked to her very soul. But there were still so many questions. What exactly was this power she was carrying? What would happen when the child was born? And perhaps the most pressing question, what would Izdu do with her once the child's power was fully realized? That night, she couldn't sleep. Her thoughts were consumed by the visions of Obioma, the warrior whose spirit seemed to be tied to her unborn child. She had no answers, but something within her whispered that the warrior's legacy was not just a blessing, it was a curse. The power her child would inherit might one day decide the fate of both worlds. Suddenly, her hand instinctively moved to her stomach, and she gasped. Beneath her touch, she could feel it, a stirring, a shift, as if the child was awakening in response to her thoughts. "Is it time?" she whispered. The answer came in a way she never expected. The stone, which had been lying on the table beside her, began to glow brighter. The light pulsed rhythmically, and in that moment, Chidinma felt her connection to the portal deepen. She could see it, feel it, like a vast river of energy stretching out into the darkness, pulling her towards something she could not fully understand. The air around her crackled with energy. The walls of the chamber seemed to ripple and shift, becoming fluid like water. In an instant, the room was no longer solid. It was part of the portal's ancient force, bending and warping as though it were alive. Chidinma stumbled back, heart racing. She felt as though she were losing control of her own body, as though the energy of the realm was pulling at her from all directions. But then, just as quickly as it had begun, the sensation stopped. The stone lay still again, its glow dimming, and the room solidified back into its familiar form. Her breath came in shallow gasps as she steadied herself, gripping the table for support. She looked down at her hands, trembling from the raw energy she had just felt. "What was that?" she murmured. The following day, Izdu appeared at her door, as if he had sensed the disturbance in the air. His gaze was penetrating, his expression unreadable. "Are you all right?" he asked, his voice laced with concern. Chidinma didn't answer immediately. Instead, she stared at the stone in her hand, its soft glow now a quiet hum. "You felt it too, didn't you?" she said, finally looking up at him. Isendu's eyes flickered, but he nodded. "The child is awakening. His power stirs. Soon, it will be beyond your control." "I don't know how to control it," Chidinma admitted, her voice shaking. "It feels like the river itself is inside me, pulling me in all directions." Isendu stepped closer, his gaze intense. "You must learn to harness it, Chidinma. You are not the first to bear such power. There have been others, those who carry the essence of this realm within them. But none have been faced with the consequences that you now face." "What consequences?" she demanded. "What am I supposed to do with this power?" "You must choose," he said, his voice grave. "The child you carry is not just the key to this realm. He is the key to both worlds. The portal's power has been dormant for centuries, but now that it has been opened, the balance is threatened. Those who seek to control it will stop at nothing. And the warrior's legacy, it cannot remain in the past forever." Chidinma's heart pounded. "The warrior? Obaoma. He told me that my child is the one who will undo the mistakes of the past. But if the child is a warrior's spirit, what will that mean for Isendu? What will that mean for the portal?" Isendu remained silent for a moment, his golden eyes staring into hers, and Chidinma could feel the weight of the decision pressing down on him. "The river god cannot escape his own nature," he said finally, his voice tinged with sorrow. "He was once a mighty force, but his power has been chained to this realm for centuries. His freedom has cost many lives, and there are those who would do anything to break that chain. Your child holds the power to destroy that chain, or to keep it intact. The question is, Chidinma, which path will you take?" The silence that followed was thick with tension. Chidinma's mind raced as she tried to process everything she had been told. Isendu's words were both an offer and a warning. The portal's power had chosen her, but now she was being asked to make a choice that could change everything. As the days passed, Chidinma found herself growing more and more restless. The portal's power was like a fire inside her, burning with a fierce intensity. She could feel it whenever she touched the stone, whenever she thought about the child growing within her. There was a weight to her thoughts now, a pressure she couldn't escape. She began to notice changes in her dreams as well. The visions of Obioma, once distant and cryptic, had become more vivid, more urgent. She would wake in the middle of the night, drenched in sweat, her heart racing. In her dreams, Obioma spoke to her in a voice that seemed to echo through the very air she breathed. "You must not let him grow without guidance," he would say. "The power he inherits is both a gift and a curse, and if he is not guided properly, he will become something no one can control." Chidinma's heart would seize at those words, and she would wake in the darkness, her mind reeling. The child she carried was destined for greatness or destruction. There seemed to be no middle ground. One evening, as Chidinma walked alone by the river's edge, lost in thought, she felt a presence behind her. She turned swiftly, expecting to find Isendu or one of his servants. But instead, there was only the soft rustling of the water, the whisper of the wind through the trees. "Who's there?" she called, her voice tense. A figure emerged from the shadows, tall and cloaked in the mist of the river. His face was hidden beneath a hood, but Chidinma could feel his eyes on her, watching her every move. "I am not your enemy," the figure said, his voice low and calm. "Who are you?" Chidinma demanded, stepping back. The figure raised his hand slowly, as if to show he meant no harm. "I was once like you, chosen by the river, the bearer of its power. But I failed." "Failed?" Chidinma repeated, confused. The figure nodded. "I carried the river god's power for too long, and it consumed me. The portal's magic is not a gift, it is a force. And when you wield it, it changes you. It becomes a part of you." Chidinma's heart skipped a beat. "What do you want from me?" "I want to help you," the figure said, his voice more insistent now. "The child you carry will either save or destroy everything. You must make a choice, and you must make it soon." The figure stepped closer to Chidinma, and though his face remained hidden beneath the hood, there was an undeniable urgency in his voice that stirred something deep within her. I know what you are facing, he said softly, the choice that lies ahead of you. And I know that you don't want to make it. No one would want to. Chidinma took a step back, her heart pounding as the cool evening air wrapped around her. The river behind her whispered like a distant call, as though the world itself was waiting for her response. You speak as if you know everything, Chidinma replied, her voice tinged with skepticism. But you don't know me. You don't know what I've been through, what I've lost. The man paused, then lowered his hood. For a brief moment, Chidinma thought she saw the flicker of recognition in his eyes. His features were sharp, with high cheekbones and a strong jaw, but his eyes, deep and dark like the river itself, held an ancient sadness. You are right. I don't know everything. But I know this much, the power within you is not only the child you carry. It is something older, something tied to the very heart of the portal. And you must understand its origin before it is too late. Chidinma stared at him, trying to piece together the pieces of this strange puzzle. What do you mean by the origin? What is it that you're not telling me? The figure stepped forward, his voice low and deliberate. I was once a guardian of the portal, like Izndu, but I failed. I thought I could control the magic, use it to protect my people. But the portal, it doesn't allow itself to be controlled. It can only be used. Chidinma frowned. Used. He nodded grimly. Yes, the portal itself is a living entity, a force of nature that has existed long before the river god was born. The river god, in his arrogance, thought he could bend it to his will, but the portal is much older than him. It has a will of its own, and it is the one who chose you, Chidinma. The revelation hit her like a thunderclap. The portal was not just a passage between worlds. It was an ancient, sentient being with its own motives. The power Izndu had shown her, the strange energy surging within her, was not simply a gift or curse tied to him. It was tied to the very fabric of the universe, to forces beyond anyone's understanding. You were a guardian? Chidinma asked, her voice trembling. And you failed. How? I was too weak, the man admitted. I couldn't resist the temptation to wield the power of the portal. It consumed me, and I tried to trap it to control it. But the portal does not submit. It punishes those who seek to dominate it. Chidinma felt a chill run down her spine. She had always known that there was something dangerous about the portal, but this was something far more sinister. I know what you're thinking, the figure said, his voice growing softer. You want to run. You want to go home. You want to leave all of this behind. But you can't, Chidinma. The moment you entered this world, the moment you awoke the portal's power, you became part of it. The portal will not let you leave. It will not let anyone leave. Chidinma's chest tightened. Then what should I do? You must learn to master the power inside you, the man said, before it consumes you, before it consumes everything. In the days that followed, Chidinma struggled to make sense of what she had learned. She kept returning to the mysterious figure's words. The portal will not let you leave. The weight of those words haunted her every waking moment. How could she escape this world? How could she protect her child and her people if the portal was so much more powerful than she had ever imagined? Izndu noticed the change in her. He had always been attuned to the subtle shifts in the environment around him, but now he saw it in Chidinma's eyes, a deepening resolve, a quiet determination. She had begun to understand the magnitude of what she had carried inside her all along. One evening, as the golden light of the setting sun bathed the chambers in a warm glow, Chidinma sat by the river, lost in thought. Izndu approached silently, his footsteps barely audible against the soft earth. You've been distant, he said softly, sitting beside her. I can feel it. The portal's power is taking its toll. Chidinma didn't look at him. She had so many questions, but they all felt like they would lead to more confusion. Chidinma, speak to me, Izndu urged. What is it that troubles you? I can't stay here, she said suddenly, her voice tight with emotion. I can't be part of this anymore. I can't be the one to decide the fate of both worlds. I don't even know how I got here, how I became part of this. Izndu was silent for a long moment. The river beside them rippled with the winds, but he remained unmoving, his gaze fixed on her. Chidinma, you must understand, he began slowly. You were chosen not because you sought this power, but because the portal needed you. The child you carry will not only bridge the two worlds, it will decide whether this world and the one you came from will survive. She shook her head, a tear slipping down her cheek. I don't want this responsibility. I just want to go home. I want to live my life again. You cannot return to the life you once knew, Izndu said gently. That world is lost to you now, but there is still a path forward. You must confront the truth of the portal, and you must understand that your child holds the balance of everything. If you refuse to embrace the power inside you, the portal will claim it for itself. A cold shiver ran through Chidinma's body. What do you mean, claim it for itself? If the child is not properly guided, if you do not learn to control the power, then the portal will awaken it fully, Izndu said, his voice tinged with sorrow. It will turn the child into something beyond your control. And it will use the child to create a rift between the two worlds, a rift that no one will survive. Chidinma could feel her heart pounding in her chest. I can't do this alone. You are not alone, Izndu said softly. I will help you. But you must accept your role in all of this. There is no escape, Chidinma. Only acceptance. As the days passed, Chidinma began her training in earnest. The mysterious figure had disappeared as suddenly as he had appeared, leaving behind only cryptic warnings. But Izndu stayed by her side, teaching her to harness the power within her. It wasn't easy. The magic inside her was wild, untamed, and it took every ounce of strength for her to control it. Each time she meditated by the river, trying to connect with the ancient energies, she could feel the pull, an irresistible force that seemed to drag at her very soul. One evening, as she sat by the river's edge, her hand resting on the stone, she heard it, a soft whisper, like the wind brushing against her ear. You are not the first to face this choice, the voice said, its tone both soothing and insistent. Many have tried before you, and many have failed. But you have the power to change everything. You must trust in the child. Trust in the power he will bring. The voice faded, leaving Chidinma with a sense of unease and wonder. She wasn't sure if the voice had come from the river itself or from the depths of her own mind. But she knew one thing: the river, the portal, the child, everything was connected. Now she had to decide. Would she embrace the power inside her, or would she fight it, knowing the consequences? The air around Chidinma had changed. What once felt like a peaceful, flowing river was now thick with tension, as if something darker had begun to stir beneath the surface. The whispers had grown more frequent, more urgent. Every time she touched the stone or meditated by the river, the ancient voice would call to her, warning her of what was to come. She knew now that the portal wasn't merely a passage between two worlds. It was a battleground. And she, the bearer of its power, was caught in the middle of an ancient war. The river god, Izndu, the mysterious figure from the shadows, they were all players in a game that she had never chosen to join. But now the game was about to consume her entirely. As the sun began to set one evening, painting the sky with hues of gold and crimson, Chidinma stood at the riverbank, gazing into the swirling waters. The air was thick with humidity, the scent of earth and water mingling in a way that felt almost intoxicating. The whispers were louder now, almost deafening. They are coming. Chidinma turned, her heart racing, her instincts telling her that something was wrong. She hadn't heard that voice before, but the warning was clear. She was no longer alone. Days later, a strange occurrence in the village confirmed her worst fears. Villagers had begun to disappear. It started with the youngest, the children who played near the river. They would wander off, lured by an unseen force, and never return. No one could explain it, but the elder shamans whispered that it was the work of dark spirits, creatures tied to the portal's ancient power. One morning, as Chidinma walked through the village, she saw a familiar face in the crowd. Obi, a young boy who had once been a close friend. He was looking at her with wide eyes, as if something had shifted within him. His once bright and carefree expression had turned somber, his movement sluggish, like he was walking through water. Obi. Chidinma called out to him, but the boy didn't respond. Instead, he began to walk away, heading toward the forest with a strange, robotic gait. Obi, she cried, rushing to catch up to him. But before she could reach him, a dark shadow swept through the air, and Obi's body crumpled to the ground. Chidinma rushed forward, kneeling beside him, her heart hammering in her chest. "Obi, wake up. What happened to you?" she cried. The boy's eyes fluttered open, but his pupils were now dark as night, devoid of life. He reached up slowly, his hand grasping at her arm with an unnatural strength. "He's coming," Obi whispered, his voice low and guttural. "The river god is coming, and you cannot stop him." With that, Obi's hand fell limp, and his body collapsed to the earth like a rag doll. Chidinma sat there for a long moment, stunned and horrified. What was happening to the villagers? What had taken over Obi? And most importantly, what did this mean for her and the child growing inside her? Later that evening, as Chidinma tried to come to terms with the terrifying events of the day, she found herself face to face with Izendu. The river god had summoned her to the deepest part of his domain, the sacred chamber beneath the waterfall, where the portal's energies flowed most powerfully. "You've seen it now," Izendu said, his voice gravely serious. "The child within you is not the only one with power. Those who seek the portal's magic are awakening, and they will stop at nothing to claim it for themselves." Chidinma felt a surge of anger, but she kept her voice steady. "You knew this was happening, didn't you? You knew they would come for us. For me." Izendu didn't flinch. "I did, but I could not protect you from the forces that are tied to the portal. They are ancient, and they will stop at nothing to regain control of what they lost long ago." Chidinma clenched her fists, her mind racing. Who are they? And why are they after the child? "They are the shadows," Izendu said, his voice tinged with bitterness. "Ancient spirits who once guarded the portal before it was sealed. They were betrayed, cast out when the portal was closed centuries ago. Now they seek to reclaim what they believe is rightfully theirs." Chidinma's breath caught in her throat. "So Obi's transformation, those children, was it them? Are they the ones taking control?" Izendu nodded. "Yes. The shadows have the ability to possess those near the river, twisting their minds and using their bodies as vessels. They are using the villagers as pawns in their war for the portal's power. And as your child grows, they will seek to use him to open the portal permanently, bringing about the end of the world as you know it." "Why me?" Chidinma asked, desperation creeping into her voice. "Why was I chosen? Why not someone else?" "Because you were the one who unlocked the portal," Izendu said simply. "You were the one who awakened it, and with that awakening, you became its key. But the shadows do not see it that way. To them, you are just another pawn, another force to be used, and they will not stop until they have what they want." Chidinma took a deep breath, the weight of the truth crashing down on her. Her child was not just a blessing. He was a weapon. The fate of two worlds rested on her shoulders, and she could no longer deny the gravity of what lay ahead. That night, the air seemed charged with an eerie, unnatural stillness. Chidinma and Izendu stood together, watching as a dark mist rose from the river. The shadows were gathering, their presence unmistakable, as they began to converge on the village. The mist thickened, and strange, ghostly shapes moved through it, their eyes glowing with an unnatural fire. "They come," Izendu whispered, his tone low and foreboding. The first of the possessed villagers appeared, his body contorted and unnaturally stiff, moving like a puppet on strings. His eyes were black, his pupils no longer human. He was a mere shell of the boy he had once been. Without warning, the figure lunged at them, arms outstretched. But Izendu was faster. He raised his hand, and the air around him shimmered with power. A wave of energy surged outward, crashing into the possessed villager. The man screamed in agony, his body convulsing as the energy tore through him. But the shadows were relentless. As more villagers appeared, each one more twisted than the last, Chidinma knew that they were no longer fighting for survival. They were fighting for the future of both worlds. Amidst the chaos, Chidinma felt the power inside her stir. The stone in her hand pulsed with energy, and her heart raced. The child within her was awakening, responding to the threat around them. She could feel the river's energy flowing through her, mingling with her own, and for the first time, she felt the full extent of her connection to the portal. She closed her eyes, centering herself, reaching deep within to find the source of the power that had been building inside her. The river's voice whispered in her mind once again, "You are not alone. Trust in the child. Trust in yourself." Chidinma opened her eyes, and the stone flared with a bright, blinding light. The river's energy surged through her veins, and she raised her arms, summoning the power she had barely begun to understand. A surge of water erupted from the river, swirling around her, crashing toward the shadows. The possessed villagers screamed as the water engulfed them, washing away the dark energy that held them captive. But the shadows weren't finished. Izndu stepped forward, his own power flaring in response. Together, they were a force unlike anything the shadows had ever faced. But even as the battle raged, Chidinma knew that this was only the beginning. The shadows were only the first wave. There were far greater threats ahead. And somewhere deep within her, the child she carried stirred, as if ready to meet the battle head-on.